So there is no particular reason why I'm putting this podcast in this section of the series on climate adaptation, but it needs to be included. So I'm going to do this. As I said, I have included this elsewhere as part of the climate solutions. This is a report that came out, I think, in 2020. If I'm not mistaken. You can look up. Do I have the date here? No, I don't. So it's called Adapt Now. As I mentioned in the previous podcast, it's by the Global Commission on Adaptation, which included Bill Gates, Ban Ki-moon, and many countries were partners as well. So we'll just look at the executive summary, and I won't go into details. You can read the report. It's basically calling for leadership on climate resilience. As we said, mitigation has many leaders, and IPCC is of course providing scenarios on pathways to global warming targets and so on. It's easier to have global coordinated efforts on mitigation targets, where adaptation and resilience are much more complicated. They are very region specific and very local. So without going into details here, we have to think that without adaptation, climate change may depress growth in global agriculture yields up to 30% by 2050. The 500 million farmers around the world will be most affected. Number of people who may lack sufficient water at least 1 month per year will soar from 3.6 billion today to more than 5 billion by 2050. And rising seas and greater storm surges could force hundreds of millions of people in coastal cities from their homes, with a total cost to coastal urban areas of more than 1 trillion each year by 2050. So we'll look at a table on return on investments, but this report, like the drawdown report, puts numbers on how much needs to be invested and what the return on investment will be as estimates out to 2050. The other thing I should mention is when we say water will be a problem and agriculture will be a problem, we have to be careful, because we are pushing bioenergy as part of the solution without thinking too much about how bioenergy may begin to compete with water and land and agriculture and food production and food security, food prices, etc. And we are talking about lack of sufficient water for 5 billion people by 2050, but many of the technological promises we are relying on for meeting global warming targets are not there yet, but so we are not focusing on technologies for clean water, even though a lot of investments happen in desalination, filtering, and so on and so forth. So we have to make sure that we are putting out messages that are consistent and not just wide-eyed optimistic future views that are not realistic. As somebody said, you have to be optimistic but realistic, or dissatisfied optimist, to bring about climate action and consistent, sustainable focus to climate action. The imperatives for accelerating adaptation. There is the human imperative. So let's just read here. Climate change has a disproportionate impact on women and girls who in most of the world have little voice in decisions that affect their lives. So the human imperative is there. We don't need to say much about it. The environmental imperative, we've already talked extensively about it. Okay, so we can talk about species extinctions. I'm not a big fan of using this terminology because it's not consistent with the past causes of extinction. Rates have to be looked at, and anyway, let's not go there right now. Okay, so there is still time to protect and work with the nature to build resilience and reduce climate risks at all scales, but the window is closing, and that's where the environmental imperative comes from for global leadership on resilience. Economic imperative, adapting now is in our strong economic self-interest. The Commission found that the overall rate of return on investments in improved resilience is very high, with benefit to cost ratios ranging from 2.2 to 1 to 10 to 1, and in some cases even higher. So we will look at this figure in a minute here. Specifically, our research finds that investing 1.8 trillion globally in 5 areas from 2020 to 2030 could generate 7.1 trillion in total net benefits. Estimates, especially economic estimates, especially for the future, are always tricky and full of uncertainties, but if they can serve the purpose of bringing about investment, action, coordination, global efforts, global leaderships, then so be it, right? So end justifies the means is not always a good idea, but if it is a no regrets decision of investing into adaptation and resilience, then it's okay, I guess, right? Benefits and costs of illustrative investments in adaptation, illustrative investments. Okay, so strengthening early warning systems. So benefit to cost ratio ranges here from 5 to 1 to 10 to 1. So total net benefits here estimated to be 0.1 trillion. And early warning systems, you can think of adaptation in two time scales. One is that you are managing short time scale, literally from days to seasons and years, as disaster prevention, alleviation, protection, recovery, management, and so on. And you are building resilience, which is the longer term. So early warnings are very critical early adaptation tools, and they save lives and property, as we know from cyclone predictions, storm predictions, extreme event managements, floods, droughts, agricultural predictions, and advisories, health advisories, and so on. Making new infrastructure resilient, expected return net benefit of 4 trillion, this by 2050. Improving dryland agriculture and crop production, $0.7 trillion. Protecting mangroves, $1 trillion. So this fits into our ecosystem-based adaptation as a part of national adaptation plan, especially for the global south and a country like India, which has almost 7,200 kilometers of coastlines, right? So both of these, improving dryland and agricultural crop production and protecting mangroves, directly fit into ecosystem-based adaptation and integrating it into national adaptation plans. And of course, making water resources management more resilient also relates to using ecosystem-based adaptation for sustainable water use and groundwater recharge, soil moisture persistence, drought resilience, soil health maintenance, and so on and so forth. And estimated return from there is $1.4 trillion. So the net benefit here is estimated at 7.1 trillion, as we mentioned here. We find that adaptation actions bring multiple benefits, which we call the triple dividend. The first dividend is avoided losses, that is the ability of the investment to reduce future losses. The second is positive economic benefits through reducing risk, increasing productivity, and driving innovation through the need for adaptation. And third is social and environmental benefits. Okay, so keep those in mind. The three revolutions for a better future. The case for ambitious adaptation is clear, but it's not happening at nearly the pace and scale required. So elsewhere I have podcasts on adaptation gaps, where we worry about where climate risks are headed, where adaptation plans and implementations are headed, and how they are not matching each other. Okay, so this is because climate impacts and risks are not adequately factored into decisions by those who make choices about the future. Achieving the change needed requires revolutions in three areas. A revolution in understanding to ensure that the risks societies and economies face are fully understood and reflected in the decisions that public and private actors make. A key element is the need to make risk visible, requiring more precise characterization of who and what is at risk and why. Okay, so we talked about this as well already in terms of data monitoring, making information available for facilitating adaptation by people and firms, protecting the vulnerable and the poor, and so on, right? Overall resilience of the system. The second one, a revolution in planning to improve how we make policy and investment decisions and how we implement solutions. The climate change is both urgent and pervasive across virtually all economic sectors. So obviously cost-benefit analysis should include the avoided losses and additional benefits to the economies by adapting now and having a revolution in planning. A revolution in finance to mobilize the funds and resources necessary to accelerate adaptation. Even though the imperative for action is clear, money is not flowing at the pace or scale needed. The World Bank has something like green funding for projects. There are impact investments that private investors are focusing on green projects. There are interests in ESG or environmental, societal and governance reporting and compliance aspects for corporations that shareholders are demanding, which is part of the adaptation and resilience improvement as well. So fully implemented, these three revolutions will protect lives, livelihoods, homes and jobs in the face of climate change. So revolution 1, a revolution in understanding; revolution 2, a revolution in planning; and a revolution in finance. Accelerating adaptation in key systems. We must apply these resolutions to the key systems affected by climate change, systems that produce food, protect and manage water and the natural environment, plan and build our cities and infrastructure, protect people from disasters, and provide financing for a more resilient future. So there is food, so global food demand will increase. So climate change has negative impacts already in many places, but you could also have that Siberia will become warm enough to become a bread basket for the world, for example. But who else will pay the price in the meantime? Those things have to be monitored as well. So there is natural environment, water, cities, infrastructure, and disaster risk management. Okay, so briefly, here is the triple dividend in action. Investing in adaptation yields avoided losses, economic benefits, and social and environmental benefits. Social and environmental benefits, again, are not always market goods. So return on investments are not easily quantified in those cases, so we have to be careful about those. Like, how do you value mangroves even though you know that they are protection against storms and storm surges? They provide habitats for many species, which provide extremely valuable livelihoods for many for a long time, and they sequester additional carbon. Marine ecosystems typically sequester 3 to 10 times the amount of carbon as the forests on land, and amazingly they don't burn down. Right now 2023 has been a disaster in terms of wildfires all the way from Hawaii into US, Europe, Asia, and so on and so forth. So marine ecosystems don't burn down, right? So we have to remember all these things. The way forward and action, I won't read the details again. We invite collaborations from all the segments of society, governments, the private sector, civil society, and citizens around the globe to join us in urgently taking this agenda forward. So here are the ways forward schematically. Understanding, planning, and finance revolutions have to combine to protect the systems, make them more resilient to climate change. Food, natural environment, water, cities, infrastructure, disaster risk management, and finance. And they called for year of action driven by 8 action tracks that went from September 2019 to December 2020. So there is an adaptation research consortium or some such thing that has been established, being run in the US, but has international plans and maybe already footprints. But this is again tricky in terms of finance, because you can bring together people who are interested in research on adaptation as a solution and resilience, etc. But how do you fund them, especially in the global south? How do you coordinate their activities? Just to coordinate activities, you need an administrative structure, travel funds, infrastructure, etc. So we have to see where that will go, but obviously that's a positive development in terms of globally coordinating and developing leadership on resilience to climate change. Okay. So I will conclude this part here.